Guys, we will mentor you into success because here's the thing, guys, nobody's taught you this. I had to learn this by myself. It's a process, but guess what? Every habit that is worth forming is hard at first. When you go to the gym at the beginning, it's hard. When you start learning a new skill, it's hard. But eventually it transitions from being a habit to it becoming your lifestyle. And the moment it becomes your lifestyle is when your life changes. Guys, let's do a video. I want to talk about The Fourth Turning. The Fourth Turning is a book I highly recommend that talks about where we are in history because history repeats itself. There's a lot of people that understand that the world is fucked, but they don't have the answers. They don't have the access. They don't have the network, right? All right, the next one is called The Fourth Turning. This is a video, shout out to Van. He's the creator of this video. He read a book, and what he did is he summarized it. And this is a good summary of the world and what is gonna be happening. I want you to take a breather. I'm not in it for the fucking views. I'm not in it for retention. I'm in here to speak to the people that are awake. Let's get started with this video. Just like the seasons, winter, fall, summer, autumn, history repeats itself, and it repeats itself in cycles over and over and over again. And right now we're entering into a cycle, and to the end of a cycle. It's called The Fourth Turning.
A book about how and when history repeats itself. And this is what the book said. History repeats itself in 80-year blocks called saculum, but we'll just call them history blocks. Not exactly 80 years. This is history, not math, but roughly the span of a human lifetime, maybe 80 to 90 years. Within these 80-year history blocks, we have 4 turnings of around 20 years each. We usually call them generations. This book calls them turnings. Turnings are sort of like seasons, like spring, summer, fall, winter. Throughout our history, we've had these 80-year blocks, and the 80-year blocks have been remarkably similar to each other. We're in one now. The first turning, the first season, is a high, an upbeat era. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era. And the fourth turning, well, sorry, but fourth turnings suck.
Which one do you think?
The fourth turning is a crisis, an era of upheaval. We're in a fourth turning right now. So let's take a look at our saculum, our history block. The history block that we're in the crisis of right now. Our high began after our World War II victory. By our, we mean America's. These are America's history blocks and turnings. During a high, the getting is good. We had the most even distribution of wealth during our high. You could work at a gas station and afford to buy a house. This high is the period that the MAGA hats refer to.
You used to be able to buy a house for $7,500. You could work a factory job and buy a house, sustain your family. Your wife would stay at home, raise your children. In a scenario where, you know what the government did? They're like, maybe we make things a little bit more expensive so that the wife can stay also at a job. And guess what? Guess who's going to raise the children? The system. Because if you control the future, you control the nation.
So this one
too.
Was one
we got Hank Williams and Elvis and Little Richard and the birth of rock and roll. We launched monkeys and men into space. This is when the Mustangs and Corvettes first came out. Our high ended with the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. The high is not a high for everyone, of course. America still had a segregated South. Homosexuality was illegal and considered a mental disorder.
Yeah, I would say it was just a high. I think America was only great if you were a white guy. Like, it was not, I could not have all the benefits of...
Sure, absolutely. But here's the thing. We need to take the principle because it's not just at a US level, it's at a global scale. Somebody said, how do we know you're telling the truth? You don't. That's why it's up to you to make your own conclusions, do your own research, and figure it out.
So you can believe monkeypox, you can go stay inside and quarantine again, or you can listen up. Like, pick one. Who do you think is right?
The high is a period of conformity. The age of nonconformity and of social justice begins during the awakening, our passionate era. During the awakening, we had Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement, acid, Vietnam protests and Vietnam itself, the women's liberation movement, Stonewall and the gay rights movement, great movies, great music. This is when the first Macintosh computer came out. The awakening is a time of increasing individualism. This second turning, this awakening, ended with the re-election of Ronald Reagan in 1984. Things get messy during the third turning, during the unraveling. We got the fall of Soviet communism and the beginning of the Russian gangster state. The greatest musicians of the time sang about violence and decay in their deteriorating cities. The LA riots, OJ, the bombing of Bosnia, and the Columbine high school shootings on the same day. September 11th, the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Our unraveling ended with the financial crisis of 2008. A fascinating fact about this book is that it was written during the last third turning, published in 1997. But the book predicts now, what's happening now in this fourth turning. And what's happening now is right on schedule. 80 years ago, in the last fourth turning, America had her Great Depression, then World War II. 80 years before that, the Civil War. 80 years before that, the Revolutionary War. Now it's our turn to save the country. So where do you fit into all this? What's your role? It depends when you were born. Each generation, each cohort, tends to embody a specific archetype. An archetype that will move the society towards the next high. Each generation's archetype is the characteristic that will define the generation in its prime, in midlife. The boomer archetype is the prophet. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs are boomers and prophets. Both predicted that one day everyone, not just big corporations and governments, would own a computer. Gates even predicted a crisis like COVID-19 5 years beforehand.
Because he runs the shit.
The writers of this book are boomers and prophets. Gen X is the nomad generation. The quintessential Gen Xer, Elon Musk, builds things that move us from one place to another. Rockets, electric cars, hyperloops, nomadic devices. But the millennials, raised during the unraveling, will emerge as the hero generation during this crisis. These are the Parkland High students, the frontline hospital workers, and Malala Yousafzai. The book says millennials will be the World War II heroes of our history block. We don't know what Gen Z will do, but they will be an artist generation. From them will emerge the next Bill Withers, Toni Morrison, or Bob Dylan, all born during the last crisis, all from an artist generation.
I want to be that.
The history block before ours ended with World War II and began with the Civil War, 80 years prior. The history block before that ended with the Civil War and began with the end of the Revolutionary War, 80 years prior. Every 80 years or so, something big comes along and changes everything. And now, we're at the end of our history block, right in the middle of our crisis. We're in the process of changing our world again. The authors of The Fourth Turning tell us that these crises are like forest fires. Unpleasant, but necessary. They clear the woods for new growth. As we work towards our next high, this crisis will tilt the playing field away from the old and towards the young, they tell us. But the victory is not guaranteed. We will, each of us, need to rise to the occasion during this crisis. We will need to develop and fortify our virtues as we pursue a greener pasture.